Welcome to my Channel Deep Sleep Mission-DSM. As we begin, I would be delighted if you could share your location in the comments below. It's truly inspiring to witness how far this content travels and to connect with viewers from across the world. They say the 5:47 a.m. train from Millbrook Station doesn't exist anymore, but I take it every Monday morning, and I think I know why they stopped listing it on the schedule. Before you close this video, before you scroll away, let me ask you something. When was the last time you really looked at the other passengers on your morning commute? I mean, really looked at them. Not just glanced up from your phone for half a second, but actually observed who's sharing that metal tube with you as it rockets through the darkness. Because after what happened to me, I can't stop looking. I can't stop watching. And sometimes, when I catch someone's reflection in the window, they're not looking back at me. They're looking through me at something that shouldn't be there. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how this started. How an ordinary software developer from Hartford, Connecticut, ended up discovering that some trains never really reach their destination. They just keep going, and the passengers, the passengers. This is where the story begins. My name is David Chen, and for 3 years, I took the same train every Monday morning. The 5:47 from Millbrook to Grand Central, then a quick transfer to get to my office in Manhattan by 8:30. 3 years of the same routine, same car, third from the front, same seat, left side, facing forward, fourth row. Same lukewarm coffee from the station vendor who knew my order by heart. Black, no sugar, in the blue travel mug I'd bought at Target during their back-to-school sale. I'm telling you these details because they matter. Routine matters. It's what keeps us grounded, what tells us everything is normal, everything is fine, until one small thing changes, and suddenly you realize nothing was ever fine at all. Looking back now, I wonder if there were signs I should have noticed. Little inconsistencies that my brain just smoothed over, the way it does when something doesn't quite fit the pattern we expect. Like how the vendor at the coffee cart never seemed to age in those 3 years. His face was exactly the same every Monday morning. Same 5 o'clock shadow, same tired eyes, same grease stain on his apron in the exact same spot. Or how the advertisement posters in the station never changed. The same personal injury lawyer with his practiced smile and perfect teeth, promising justice for accidents that happened in another life, another time. But routine has a way of making us blind. We see what we expect to see, hear what we expect to hear. The mind fills in gaps, creates continuity where there might be none. It's a survival mechanism, really. If we questioned every tiny detail, every minor inconsistency, we'd go insane. Better to accept the comfortable lie than face the uncomfortable truth. It was October 23rd, a Monday like any other. The leaves were at that perfect New England stage where they looked like someone had set the trees on fire with beauty. I remember thinking that as I walked to the station, my breath forming little clouds in the 40-degree morning air. The parking lot was fuller than usual. Probably people getting an early start on the week before Halloween, trying to make up for time they'd take off for trick-or-treating with their kids. The train pulled in right on time. 5:47. The doors hissed open with that familiar pneumatic sigh, like the train was tired before the journey even began. I stepped into car 3, turned left, walked to my seat. The fabric was that scratchy blue stuff that all commuter trains seem to have, like they bought it in bulk in 1987 and never bothered updating. I settled in, pulled out my phone, and that's when I noticed him, the man in the seat across from me. Now, I'd been taking this train for 3 years, right? Same car, same seat, and I knew the regulars. There was Barbara, the real estate agent who always wore too much perfume and talked too loudly on her phone about properties with potential. There was Marcus, the college kid who worked weekends at his dad's hardware store and always had paint under his fingernails. there was the woman I'd mentally nicknamed Sudoku Lady, because she did the same puzzle book every morning, methodically, like she was defusing a bomb. But this man, I'd never seen him before. He was maybe 60, wearing a suit that looked expensive but old, like something you'd find in a vintage shop in Brooklyn, the kind hipsters would pay $300 for. His hair was slicked back with something that made it shine under the harsh fluorescent lights. And he was smiling, not at anything in particular, just smiling, staring straight ahead at the advertisement for a personal injury lawyer, smiling like it was the funniest thing he'd ever seen. There was something wrong with his smile, though I couldn't put my finger on it at first. It was too wide, maybe, or held too long. People don't naturally smile like that. Not unless they're posing for a photograph or trying to sell you something. This was neither. This was the smile of someone who'd forgotten how smiles were supposed to work, who was imitating the motion without understanding the emotion behind it. I tried not to stare, pulled up my emails, started going through the usual Monday morning dread. Status reports, meeting requests, passive-aggressive notes from Karen in accounting about expense reports. But every few seconds my eyes would drift back to him. He never moved, never shifted his position, never even blinked that I could see. Just sat there, hands folded neatly in his lap, smiling at that advertisement. His breathing was wrong too regular, too measured. Inhale for exactly 4 seconds. Exhale for exactly 4 seconds, like a metronome made flesh. The train lurched forward, and we were off. The first 20 minutes were normal. We stopped at Riverside, then Fairfield, then Westport. People got on, people got off. The usual Monday morning shuffle of commuters in their North Face jackets and sensible shoes. The man across from me never moved. But here's something I noticed during those normal 20 minutes. Something that didn't register as significant until later. The people getting on and off weren't quite right either. Oh, they looked normal enough at first glance. But if you really watched them, really paid attention, you'd notice things. Like how they all moved at exactly the same pace. How their conversations, when you tried to listen closely, were just loops of the same phrases repeated over and over. How some of them were getting off at stations they'd just gotten on at, only to board again at the next stop, like they were stuck in some endless circuit. I started paying more attention to the sounds around me. Barbara's phone conversation wasn't making sense. She kept saying the same things. A charming colonial with original hardwood floors, excellent curb appeal, move-in ready. But when I tried to focus on her actual words, they seemed to slide away from my consciousness like water off glass. Marcus's music was leaking from his earbuds, but it wasn't music at all. Just static, arranged into a rhythm that almost sounded like a song if you weren't listening too carefully. It was after Westport that things got wrong. See, after Westport, the next stop should be South Norwalk. It's a 12-minute ride. I know because I've timed it hundreds of times, usually while calculating if I have enough time to grab a second coffee at Grand Central. But 12 minutes passed, then 15, then 20. I looked up from my phone. The window showed nothing but darkness rushing by, which wasn't unusual. This stretch of track goes through some wooded areas, but we should have hit South Norwalk by now. The darkness outside was absolute now, deeper than it should be even in the pre-dawn hours. There were no lights, no houses, no cars on distant highways. Nothing. Just pure, impenetrable black. As if we were traveling through a void between worlds. And the sound was wrong too. The rhythmic clacking of wheels on tracks had changed, becoming more organic, more alive. Like footsteps, like breathing, like something massive pacing alongside the train. I glanced around the car. Nobody else seemed concerned. Barbara was still yakking on her phone about a charming colonial with original hardwood. Sudoku Lady was filling in numbers with her mechanical pencil. Click, click, click. Marcus had his earbuds in, head bobbing to whatever was playing. But when I looked closer, I realized they weren't moving quite right. Their motions were too fluid, too perfect. Barbara's mouth moved in exactly the same pattern every 30 seconds. Sudoku Lady's pencil traced the same path over and over, never actually filling in different squares. Marcus's head bobbed to a beat that had no variation, no human imperfection. And the man across from me, his smile had gotten wider. I checked my phone. No signal. That happens sometimes in the dead zones between stations, but we should have been at a station by now. I looked at the time. 6:23 a.m. We'd been moving for 36 minutes without stopping. The train was moving faster now too, much faster than any commuter train should go. The force pressed me back into my seat, and I could feel the car swaying more than usual. Outside, the darkness was rushing past at impossible speeds, creating a visual static that made my eyes water when I tried to focus on it. "Excuse me," I said to Barbara, who was sitting 2 rows up. "Weren't we supposed to stop at South Norwalk?" She held up a finger, the universal sign for "I'm on an important call," and kept talking. But I noticed something. Her mouth was moving, but I couldn't quite make out the words anymore. It was like listening to someone talk underwater. The sounds were there, but they didn't form into anything meaningful. I stood up. The train swayed, and I had to grab the back of a seat to steady myself. We were going faster than usual, much faster. The darkness outside the window wasn't the normal pre-dawn darkness anymore. It was absolute, like someone had painted the windows black. "Hey," I said louder. "Does anyone know why we haven't stopped?" Marcus looked up, pulled out one earbud. "What?" "We haven't stopped since Westport. It's been over half an hour." He shrugged. "Probably express service. They do that sometimes on Mondays." Express service, right. Except I'd been taking this train for 3 years and there was no express service. Not on the 547. But Marcus was already putting his earbud back in, already resuming his mechanical head bobbing. When I looked at his face more closely, I saw something that made my stomach drop. His eyes weren't focused on anything. They were glassy, vacant, like the eyes of a doll. He was looking through me, not at me. I walked toward the front of the car, toward the door that led to the next car up. My hand was on the handle when I heard it. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." The voice was cultured, refined, like a college professor or a museum curator. I turned. The smiling man had spoken. He was looking at me now, and his eyes were completely black. No whites, no iris, just black from edge to edge. "The conductor doesn't like it when passengers move between cars while the train is in motion," he said, his smile never wavering. "Safety regulations, you understand." My hand was still on the door handle. Through the window I could see into the next car. It was empty, completely empty. Not a single passenger. "Where is everyone?" I asked. "Everyone is exactly where they're supposed to be," the man replied. "Please, sit down. We'll be arriving soon." "Arriving where?" "This train goes to Grand Central." "Oh, my dear boy." His smile widened, showing teeth that were far too white, far too sharp. "This train goes exactly where it's always gone. You just never noticed before. I should have run. Should have pulled that emergency brake cord. Should have done something. Anything. But I sat down. I sat down because everyone else was acting normal. And there's something about social pressure, about not wanting to be the crazy person on the train, that makes you doubt your own senses. Even though every instinct I had was screaming at me to get away, to escape, to do anything but remain in that seat, I found myself sinking back into the scratchy blue fabric. The man's eyes never left me, and I could feel them boring into my skull even when I tried to look away. The man leaned forward. David Chen, software developer. Divorced 2 years ago. lives alone in a one-bedroom apartment on Maple Street. Takes this train every Monday to avoid the Sunday night depression that sets in when you realize another week of meaningless work awaits you. My blood turned to ice. How do you... I know all my passengers, he said. Barbara Hendricks, cheating on her husband with her personal trainer, but tells herself it's just business meetings. Marcus Lopez dropped out of college but hasn't told his father yet, keeps pretending to go to classes, and Dorothy Weeks, he gestured to Sudoku Lady, hasn't actually filled in a single number correctly in 6 months. She just likes the routine of pretending everything still makes sense. I looked at Dorothy. She was still working on her puzzle, but now I could see it. The numbers were all wrong. They didn't add up, they never had. But worse than that, I could see through the pages of her puzzle book. It was the same page, repeated over and over, the same grid, the same scattered numbers, the same pencil marks in the same squares. She'd been doing the same puzzle for months, maybe years, convinced each time that it was a new one. "What is this?" I whispered. "This, David, is the 547 from Millbrook, the train that takes people who are stuck, people who go through the motions, day after day, pretending their lives have meaning, pretending they're going somewhere." He leaned back. "But you're not going anywhere, are you? None of you are. You're on a dead-end train, and you've always known it." The darkness outside the window was starting to change. Shapes were forming, shadows of things that shouldn't exist. I saw glimpses of other trains running parallel to ours, but they were wrong. They were running backwards, or upside down, or they were made of things that weren't metal and glass, but something organic, something that pulsed and breathed. In one of them, I could see passengers pressed against the windows, their mouths open in silent screams, their hands clawing at the glass. In another, the passengers were melting, their faces sliding down like wax, reforming, melting again in an endless cycle. And between the trains, in the spaces that shouldn't exist, things moved. Dark shapes that might have been human once, but were stretched and distorted, their limbs too long, their movements too fluid. They kept pace with our train effortlessly, sometimes reaching toward the windows with fingers that had too many joints. "This isn't real," I said. "This can't be real." "Real is relative," the man said. "You've been taking this train for 3 years, David. Every Monday, the same seat, the same coffee, the same commute to a job that slowly kills you. Tell me, what's the difference between that and this? At least here, you're finally seeing the truth." He was right, and that was the most terrifying part. My life had become a series of automated responses, a carefully scripted routine that I performed without thinking. Wake up at 5:15. Shower, coffee, drive to the station. Same seat, same scroll through emails, same 8 hours at a desk, pushing pixels around a screen, solving problems that didn't matter, creating value for people I'd never meet. Same train home, same microwave dinner, same Netflix queue, same bed at 10:30. Repeat. When was the last time I'd made a real choice? When was the last time I'd done something spontaneous, something that mattered, something that changed the trajectory of my existence even slightly? The train was slowing down. I could feel it. The brakes were engaging, but the sound they made wasn't the usual screech of metal on metal. It was more like breathing, like something massive was exhaling. "Next stop," the man announced, though there was no announcement over the speakers. End of the line. I looked around the car. Barbara had stopped talking on her phone. She was staring straight ahead, her mouth still moving in silent conversation. Marcus had both earbuds in, but no music was playing. I could see his phone screen from here. It was dead black. Dorothy was still doing her puzzle, but she was writing the same number over and over, 777. The train came to a complete stop. Outside the window, there was a platform, but it wasn't Grand Central. It wasn't any station I recognized. The signs were in English, but the words kept changing, shifting, like they couldn't decide what they wanted to say. Welcome to, and then static, visual static, like a TV that couldn't find a channel. The platform stretched impossibly far in both directions, disappearing into a haze that might have been distance or might have been something else entirely. There were benches, but they were all occupied by people who sat perfectly still, their hands folded in their laps, staring at nothing. Some of them were wearing modern clothes. Others looked like they'd stepped out of different decades: 1950s housewives, 1980s businessmen, Victorian gentlemen with pocket watches. All of them had the same expression: blank, peaceful, empty. "This is where you get off," the man said. "No." I stood up. "No, I'm not getting off here." "Oh, but you are, you all are. Because this is where you've always been going. The dead end. The final stop on a journey to nowhere." He stood up too, and he was taller than he should have been. His head nearly touched the ceiling of the train car. "Every Monday, you board this train thinking you're going to work, to life, to something that matters. But you're just going in circles, David. Circles that get smaller and smaller until there's nowhere left to go but here." The doors hissed open. That familiar pneumatic sound, but underneath it, I heard something else. Whispering. Hundreds of voices whispering the same thing over and over. "Takes the same dead-end train. Takes the same dead-end train. Takes the same dead-end train." I ran. Not off the train. That would have been what he wanted. I ran toward the back, through car after car, and each one was worse than the last. In one, the passengers were all copies of the same person. A middle-aged man in a gray suit, sitting in every seat, all of them staring at nothing. In another, the seats were empty, but I could see indentations, like invisible people were sitting there weighing down the fabric with their unseen presence. But there were other cars too, cars that defied logic and physics. One was filled with passengers from different time periods, all of them riding the same endless commute. A woman in a Victorian dress sat next to a man in a 1960s mod suit, who sat next to a teenager in modern clothes. They all had the same vacant expression, the same mechanical movements. All of them trapped in their own version of the same routine. Another car was filled with mirrors instead of windows, and in each reflection, I saw myself, but different versions. Older, younger, wearing different clothes, living different lives, but all of them sitting in the same seat, taking the same train, going nowhere. One reflection showed me with gray hair and tired eyes still riding this train decades from now. Another showed me as a young man, fresh out of college, just starting this routine that would consume his life. All of us trapped in the same endless loop. The whispering got louder. "Takes the same dead-end train. Takes the same dead-end train." I burst through the door of the last car, and suddenly, silence. This car was different. Older. The seats were red velvet, not blue polyester. The lights were gas lamps, not fluorescent. And sitting in the very last row was a woman. She looked normal, completely normal. Jeans, a Columbia University sweatshirt, maybe 30 years old. She was reading an actual book. "The Great Gatsby." "You're running from him," she said without looking up. "You can see me? You're real?" She laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Real as you are," which might not be saying much at this point. She closed her book, looked at me with tired eyes. "Let me guess. The man in the expensive suit, black eyes, tells you you're on a dead-end train?" I nodded, couldn't find words. "He's been doing this for years, maybe decades, maybe longer." She stood up. "My name's Sarah. Sarah Kim. I was like you once. Took the train every day. Same routine, same death by 1,000 cuts. Then one Monday, this happened." "How long have you been here?" "Time doesn't work the same way here. Could be days, could be years. I've tried to keep track, but she held up her book. I've read this same book hundreds of times. Every time I finish it, I forget I've read it before, until the very end, when it all comes flooding back. That's when I know I'm still me, still fighting it. So it's not real. It's what? A dream, a hallucination. It's real enough. She walked over to the window, gestured for me to look. See for yourself. I looked out. The platform was still there, but now I could see beyond it. There were hundreds of trains, all stopped, all full of people who weren't moving, just sitting in their seats, staring at nothing. And walking between the trains was the man in the suit. Except there were dozens of him, all identical, all smiling that same terrible smile. He feeds on routine, Sarah explained, on people who've given up without realizing it, who go through the motions of living without actually being alive. Every Monday, he pulls one train off course, takes it here, and the passengers, they stay forever, until they can't remember anything else, until they become part of the train itself. She pulled up her sleeve. Her arm was partially transparent. I could see the outline of the seat behind her through her skin. I've been fighting it for, I don't know how long. Time doesn't work right here, but I'm losing. I could see it now, the way she flickered slightly around the edges, the way her voice sometimes seemed to come from far away. She was fading, becoming part of this place, this endless depot of stopped trains and empty lives. There has to be a way out. There is. She walked to the emergency exit door, the one with all the warnings about not opening it while the train is in motion. But it's not what you think. She pulled the handle. The door swung open, but instead of the platform, instead of tracks, there was nothing. Not darkness, not light, just nothing. An absence of everything. You have to choose, she said. Stay on the train, become like them, like me. Eventually forget you were ever anything else. Or jump, and maybe wake up. Wake up? Monday morning, 5:45 a.m., 2 minutes before the train arrives. You'll remember this like a dream, a nightmare, but you'll remember enough to make a different choice. What different choice? She smiled, and for the first time, it was genuine. Drive to work, take a different train, quit your job, move to another state, it doesn't matter what, just break the routine. Stop being a passenger in your own life. The whispering was getting louder. I could hear footsteps coming through the cars, multiple sets, all in perfect synchronization. They're coming, Sarah said. Choose, now. I looked back through the cars. The men in suits were walking toward us, all of them smiling, all of them with those black eyes, and behind them I could see the other passengers following. Barbara, Marcus, Dorothy, all walking in perfect lockstep. Their eyes were black now, too. What about you? I asked Sarah. I made my choice a long time ago, stayed too long, trying to warn others. Now I'm part of it. Her hand was fading, becoming translucent. But you still have a chance. Jump, David, jump now. The first of the suited men reached our car. There's nowhere to go, David. This is where you belong, with all the other people going nowhere. I looked at the nothing beyond the door, then at Sarah, who was barely visible now, just an outline, a suggestion of a person. Remember, she whispered, break the routine. I jumped. For a moment there was nothing, no sensation, no thought, no existence. Then my alarm went off. 5:45 a.m., Monday, October 23rd. I sat up in bed gasping, sweat soaking through my t-shirt. My phone showed the familiar morning notifications. Weather, emails, news updates, everything normal, everything routine. I got dressed, grabbed my coffee mug, headed for the door. My car keys were on the hook where I always left them, but I walked past them. Walked to the station. Stood on the platform with all the other Monday morning commuters. The train pulled in at 5:47. The doors opened with that pneumatic hiss. I didn't get on. I stood there, watching, as the passengers filed in. Barbara was there, already on her phone. Marcus with his earbuds, Dorothy with her puzzle book. They all got on, found their seats, settled into their routines. And in the third car, fourth row, left side, facing forward, I saw him. The man in the expensive suit. He was looking at me through the window, smiling. He raised his hand in a small wave, as if to say, maybe next Monday. The doors closed. The train pulled away, and I watched it disappear into the pre-dawn darkness, heading for Grand Central. Or somewhere else. I'll never know for sure. I walked home, called in sick, started looking for a new job, a new apartment, a new life. Anything but the same routine. Anything but the same dead-end train. But sometimes on Monday mornings I wake up at 5:45 and wonder, was it real? Or just the most vivid nightmare I've ever had? And sometimes, when I pass by Millbrook Station, I see people waiting for the 5:47. And I want to warn them, want to tell them not to get on. But what would I say? How could they believe me? So I just keep walking, keep moving, keep breaking the routine. Because I know, somewhere, somehow, that train is still running. Still picking up passengers who don't realize they're already at the end of the line. Still taking people to nowhere, one Monday morning at a time. And the man in the suit, he's still smiling. Still waiting. Still watching for the ones who've given up without knowing it. The ones who take the same dead-end train. But here's what haunts me most. What keeps me up on Sunday nights sweating, terrified of what Monday might bring. Sometimes, when I'm walking past the station, I see myself. Standing on the platform, coffee in hand, waiting for the 5:47. And I wonder, did I really jump? Or am I still on that train, still sitting in that seat, still trapped in that endless Monday morning commute? And if you're listening to this, if you take the same train every morning, the same route, the same seat, ask yourself, when was the last time you really looked at the other passengers? When was the last time you noticed if the stops were all where they should be? When was the last time you checked if you ever actually arrived? Because maybe, just maybe, you're on the dead-end train too. And you don't even know it. Sweet dreams. Story number 2. The worst part about speaking a language no one else understands isn't the isolation. It's knowing that one day someone will answer back. I'm recording this at 3 in the morning from my apartment in Denver. The same apartment where everything started 6 months ago. If you're listening to this right now, cozy in your bed, maybe with just your bedside lamp on, I need you to do something for me. Check your window. Make sure it's locked. Trust me on this one. Because what I'm about to tell you, it's still happening. And the more people who know about it, the safer we all might be. So please, if this story keeps you up tonight, if it makes you question every whisper in the dark, share it. Comment below if you've ever heard something you couldn't explain. Subscribe if you want to know what happens next. Because this isn't over. Not by a long shot. All right, let me tell you how it all began. My name is Sarah Chen, and I've lived in Denver my whole life. 32 years of predictable Colorado weather, Broncos games, and craft beer festivals. I worked as a translator for a tech company downtown. 5 languages fluently: English, Mandarin, Spanish, French, and German. My coworkers used to joke that I collected languages like some people collect stamps. 6 months ago, I started collecting something else entirely. It was a Tuesday night in January. One of those nights where the snow falls so quietly you can hear your own heartbeat. I was working late, translating user manuals for our German clients, when I heard it for the first time. Vethera nes Calum. The voice came from somewhere in my apartment. Soft, almost melodic. I pulled off my headphones, listened, nothing. Just the hum of my laptop. and the distant sound of traffic on I-25. I went back to work, but 20 minutes later, Vethara nes calum, sorvanitel. This time, I stood up. My apartment isn't big, just a one-bedroom in Capitol Hill. I checked everywhere. The bathroom, the closet, even looked out the window at the fire escape. Nobody there. Fresh snow, completely undisturbed. That's when I realized something that made my skin crawl. I understood what the voice was saying, not the words exactly. They weren't in any language I knew. But somehow, deep in my brain, I understood the meaning. The threshold grows thin. We are waiting. I tried to convince myself it was just exhaustion. Too much coffee, too many late nights. But over the next few days, it got worse. The whispers came more frequently. Always when I was alone. Sometimes single words, sometimes full sentences. Always in that strange, fluid language that seemed to bypass my ears and speak directly to some ancient part of my brain. Kelani vor neseth. The old doors remember. Mortava selu kaivar. Your blood carries the key. By the end of the week, I wasn't sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear them. Multiple voices now, having conversations in that impossible language. I started recording myself sleeping, hoping to catch something on audio. But when I played back the recordings, silence. Just my own breathing and the occasional car passing by. That's when I made my first mistake. I started answering back. It happened accidentally. I was making coffee one morning, running on maybe 2 hours of sleep, when I heard the clearest message yet. Saratha vel korim nasara? Without thinking, I responded, Nala? Nala korim vethara nes tuval. My hand froze halfway to the coffee pot. What did I just say? The words had flowed out naturally, like I'd been speaking this language my whole life. In English, I'd essentially said, No, I'm not ready. The threshold is still strong. The silence that followed was different from normal silence. It was expectant, like the entire apartment was holding its breath. Then, for the first time, the voice sounded pleased. Ah, Kelithar Nesvaram Sorvani. She begins to remember. We wait. I called in sick to work and spent the entire day at the Denver Public Library, researching everything I could about unknown languages, auditory hallucinations, glossolalia, anything that might explain what was happening to me. I found nothing. Well, almost nothing. In an old linguistics journal from 1987, I found a brief mention of something called xenoglossy, the ability to speak a language you've never learned. Most cases were linked to religious experiences or mental illness, but there was one paragraph that made my blood run cold. In rare instances, subjects have reported speaking languages that appear to have no earthly origin. These cases, while unverified, often share common elements. The languages are described as fluid or musical. Subjects report understanding meaning without recognizing words, and in all documented cases, the ability manifests suddenly in adulthood. Of the 17 cases studied, all subjects reported that the language came from outside and felt ancient beyond measure. Follow-up studies were impossible, as all 17 subjects disappeared within 1 year of manifestation. All 17 subjects disappeared. I photocopied the article with shaking hands. As I walked home through the snowy streets, past the familiar shops and restaurants on Colfax Avenue, everything felt different. Foreign. Like I was seeing my city through someone else's eyes. That night, the voices were louder than ever. Not shouting, just more insistent, more present. And I understood every word. The seal weakens with each passing. She knows the words now. Soon the door will recognize its keeper. I tried to stay awake, but exhaustion finally won. I drifted off on my couch, TV playing quietly in the background. And that's when I had the dream. Though calling it a dream feels like calling the ocean a puddle. I was standing in a place that wasn't a place. A vast space filled with impossible architecture. Structures that folded in on themselves, stairs that led up and down simultaneously, doorways that opened onto the same room from different angles. The geometry hurt to look at, like my brain was trying to process something it wasn't equipped to understand. And everywhere, there were doors, thousands of them, millions, each one different. Wood, metal, stone, materials I couldn't identify. Some were massive, stretching up into darkness. Others were so small I'd have to crawl through. But one door was different. It was simple, wooden, with brass hinges that gleamed despite the lack of any visible light source. It looked exactly like the door to my apartment. Exactly, down to the small scratch near the handle where I dropped my keys last year. As I approached it, the voices grew louder, not in volume, but in presence. They were coming from behind the door, all of them, speaking in unison now. Kelithar Nesthurani, Mortava Kelix Nethara, Vithara Nes Kalum. The keeper has come home. Blood calls to blood. The threshold grows thin. I reached for the handle and woke up gasping, covered in sweat. But here's the thing that made me realize this was more than just stress or exhaustion or whatever rational explanation I'd been clinging to. My hand was still extended, reaching for something, and clutched in my fingers was a brass door handle. Old, tarnished, and impossibly cold. A door handle that matched nothing in my apartment. I still have it. I'm looking at it right now as I record this. And sometimes I swear I can feel it pulling me somewhere. After finding the door handle, I did what any rational person would do. I tried to get help. I made an appointment with a psychiatrist, Dr. Rebecca Martinez, whose office was in a gleaming medical building near Cherry Creek. I didn't tell her about the door handle. That seemed like a quick way to get involuntarily committed. But I told her about the voices, the language, the dreams. She listened patiently, taking notes on her tablet. When I finished, she leaned back and gave me the kind of smile doctors give when they think they've figured you out. Sarah, what you're experiencing sounds like a form of hypnagogic hallucination. It's more common than you'd think, especially in people who work with multiple languages. Your brain is essentially creating a composite language from all the ones you know. I interrupted her. Nala Kerix Thurani, Vethara Nes Korim, Metalix Ne Thurani. The words just came out. Dr. Martinez's smile froze. I'm sorry. What language was that? That's the thing, I said. It's not any language, but you understood me, didn't you? Part of you understood. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, very quietly, I thought you said something about thresholds and metal, but that's impossible. I don't speak. Kelithar Nes Verum, I said. The keeper begins to remember. Dr. Martinez stood up abruptly. I think we should end our session here. I'll have my assistant call you to schedule a follow-up. She never called. When I tried to make another appointment, I was told Dr. Martinez had taken an unexpected leave of absence. Her assistant sounded nervous, kept asking if I was the woman who spoke the strange language. I wasn't the only one hearing it anymore. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing things. Small things at first. The barista at my regular coffee shop on Larimer Square paused mid-sentence while taking my order, head tilted like she was listening to something. A man on the 15 bus suddenly looked up from his phone, eyes wide, scanning the other passengers with barely concealed panic. And then there were the doors. I started seeing them everywhere. Doors that didn't belong. A red door in the middle of a park where no building stood. A metal door flush against the sidewalk on 16th Street Mall that no one else seemed to notice. A door made of what looked like black glass standing free in an empty parking lot. I never tried to open them, but I photographed each one. When I looked at the pictures later, they just showed empty spaces. The doors didn't photograph, but I knew they were there. I could feel them calling to me in that ancient language. 3 weeks after my visit to Dr. Martinez, I got a call from an unknown number. Usually, I don't answer those, but something made me pick up. "Is this Sarah Chen?" The voice was male, older, tired. "Yes. My name is Professor William Hartley. I taught linguistics at CU Boulder until recently. I heard about your situation from a colleague. The language you're hearing, others are hearing it too." My heart raced. How many others? Here in Colorado, at least 30 that I know of. Nationwide, hundreds, maybe thousands. We've been trying to connect to understand what's happening. Can we meet? We arranged to meet at Union Station the next day. I arrived early, found a table at the terminal bar, and waited. I knew Professor Hartley the moment he walked in. Not because I'd seen him before, but because of the way he moved. Careful. Watching. Like someone who'd learned that reality had more layers than most people realized. He was in his 60s, gray-bearded, wearing a Denver Broncos cap that had seen better days. He sat down across from me without ordering anything. "How long have you been hearing it?" he asked without preamble. 6 weeks? He nodded grimly. "I'm at 4 months. Dr. Martinez, the psychiatrist you saw, she started hearing it the day after your appointment. She's with us now." Us? Those of us who hear the language. We call ourselves the listeners, though that's not quite right. We're more like translators, bridges between what is and what's trying to be. He pulled out a worn notebook, pages covered in symbols I recognized. The written form of the language I'd been hearing. Seeing it on paper was like looking at my own thoughts. "We've been documenting everything," he continued. "The messages are getting more complex, more urgent. They're talking about something called the convergence. When enough people can hear the language, when enough doors appear, Vithera nes calum nethix," I finished. "The threshold doesn't just grow thin. It opens." He stared at me. "You're further along than most. The language comes more naturally to you. That makes you valuable and dangerous. Dangerous to who? To everyone. Because when the convergence happens, when that threshold finally opens, we don't know what's on the other side. But Sarah, I don't think it's waiting to come through. I think it's waiting for us to come home." That night, back in my apartment, I found something that confirmed my worst fears. Hidden in my closet, behind boxes I hadn't touched in years, was a journal. My handwriting, but I had no memory of writing it. Page after page of the ancient language, drawings of impossible architecture, and one phrase repeated over and over: "I remember, I remember, I remember what we were before we forgot." The journal changed everything. As I read through it, pages I had no memory of writing, memories that weren't quite memories began to surface. Like trying to recall a dream you had as a child, fragments that felt both foreign and intimately familiar. I saw flashes of that impossible place, the realm of endless doors. But now I understood what it was. Not another dimension or some alien world. It was the space between, the place where all possibilities existed before they collapsed into reality. And we, some part of us, had been there before. Professor Hartley called it ancestral memory, locked away in our DNA until something triggered it. But I knew better now. We hadn't evolved from something that knew this language. We had forgotten it, deliberately. And now, for some reason, we were starting to remember. The listeners met every Thursday in the basement of an old church in 5 Points. Not for religious reasons, but because it was one of the few places in Denver where the doors didn't appear. Consecrated ground, Hartley said, though he couldn't explain why that mattered. There were 12 of us at first. Dr. Martinez was there, looking haggard but determined. A teenage kid named Marcus from Aurora who'd been hearing the voices since his 16th birthday. A grandmother named Elena, who spoke the language in her sleep and woke up with knowledge of mathematical equations that shouldn't exist. We shared our experiences, documented the messages, tried to piece together what was happening. But it was like trying to solve a puzzle when half the pieces existed in a dimension we couldn't fully perceive. Then, one Thursday, Marcus didn't show up. His mother called Professor Hartley the next day. Marcus had left his room in the middle of the night, walked to a door that had appeared in their backyard, a door made of what looked like living wood, with branches that still grew leaves. He'd opened it, stepped through, and the door had vanished. But here's the thing. His mother could see the door. She'd never heard the language, never experienced what we had. But once Marcus opened that door, she could see it. She could see where her son had gone. He looked so happy, she told us through tears. Like he was going home. After Marcus, we started losing 1 or 2 people every week. Always the same pattern. They'd find their door, each one unique, personal somehow, and they'd walk through. Sometimes family members saw it happen. Sometimes they just vanished. Dr. Martinez was next. Her door appeared in her office, a modern glass door that opened onto a view of stars arranged in patterns that hurt to look at. She left us a note in the language. Kelithar Moren Thorani, Bethara Nes Kailum, Sorvani Tel Nethara. The keeper goes home. The threshold is open. We are what waits. By the time November came around, there were only 4 of us left. Professor Hartley, Elena, myself, and a new member, a man named David, who'd started hearing the language just 2 weeks before. The voices were constant now, a chorus that made normal life impossible. I'd lost my job, spent my savings. None of that seemed to matter anymore. And the doors, God, the doors were everywhere. Sometimes I'd see dozens in a single block. They'd started appearing in my apartment too. Cabinet doors that opened onto impossible vistas. A closet that showed a city of living crystal. My bathroom door that sometimes opened onto a forest of trees with silver leaves. I'd stopped sleeping in my bedroom. That door, the one that looked exactly like the door from my dream. I could hear things moving behind it, waiting. 2 weeks ago, everything accelerated. I was walking through Washington Park trying to clear my head when I saw him, a man in a business suit standing in front of a door that materialized out of thin air. The door was corporate-looking, all steel and glass, with a keycard reader that glowed soft blue. But it wasn't the door that stopped me cold. It was the man's face. He wasn't a listener, I could tell. He had that glazed, terrified look of someone seeing the impossible for the first time. But he was seeing it. A random person, someone who'd never heard the language, was seeing a door. "The convergence," I whispered. As I watched, frozen, the man reached out with a shaking hand. The moment his fingers touched the door handle, his expression changed. The fear melted away, replaced by a look of recognition, understanding. He swiped a keycard I hadn't noticed him holding, and the door opened. Beyond was an office, but not any office that could exist in our world. The walls were made of flowing data, numbers and codes that rewrote themselves constantly. The man stepped through without hesitation. The door vanished, but I could still see the after image, burned into reality like staring at the sun too long. That's when I understood. The doors weren't just appearing to us anymore. The barrier between worlds wasn't just thin. It was breaking down entirely. Soon, everyone would see them. Everyone would have to choose. Professor Hartley called an emergency meeting that night. Only Elena and I showed up. David had found his door, a garage door that opened onto a workshop where tools bent reality itself. "It's happening faster than we thought," Hartley said. He looked exhausted, older. "The reports are coming in from everywhere. Beijing, London, Sao Paulo. Doors appearing to people who've never heard the language. Reality is unraveling." "Not unraveling," Elena said softly. She'd been quiet all evening, but now her eyes were bright with certainty. "Remembering. We're remembering what we were before we chose to forget." She stood up, and I knew she'd found her door. "Where?" Hartley asked. She smiled, sad but peaceful. "My kitchen. It showed me my daughter, my Maria, who died 10 years ago. She's there, in that place between. She's been waiting for me." We didn't try to stop her. What would have been the point? That was 3 days ago. Now it's just Professor Hartley and me, and I haven't heard from him since yesterday. His phone goes straight to voicemail. I think I know why. Because I found my door too. It appeared an hour ago, right where I knew it would. My bedroom door, the one I've been avoiding for weeks. But it's not my bedroom behind it anymore. Through the gap at the bottom, I can see light that isn't quite light. Hear music that isn't quite music. And the voices. They're not speaking the ancient language anymore. They're speaking English. My mother's voice, clear as day, though she died when I was 8. "Sarah, honey, we're all here. Everyone who ever was. Everyone who chose to forget. But forgetting was never meant to be forever. Just long enough to appreciate what we had. Come home, baby, come home." I'm still sitting here recording this, the brass door handle cold in my hand. I know what's behind that door now. Not death, not some alien dimension, but the truth we all chose to forget, lives and lives ago. The place between stories, between possibilities, where we exist as what we truly are. The convergence isn't an invasion, it's a reunion. But here's the thing. Here's why I'm recording this, why I need you to share it, to talk about it, to ask questions in the comments. Because we still have a choice. The doors are appearing faster now, but they can't make us walk through. We chose to forget for a reason. We chose this limited, painful, beautiful existence for a reason. What was that reason? I don't know. The knowledge is there, just behind that door, waiting. All I have to do is turn the handle. But once I do, once I remember everything, will I still be me? Will any of us still be human? Or will we become something else? Something that looks back at this world, this life, as nothing more than a dream we once had? The door is calling. My mother's voice, and behind it, millions of others. Everyone who's already remembered, already gone home. I'm going to post this recording, then I have to decide. Stay in this world that's slowly forgetting how to forget, or step through and remember everything. If you're listening to this, if you've made it this far, check your doors. Check them carefully, because one of them might not lead where it used to. And when you find that door, when you stand before it with your hand on the handle, you'll have to make the same choice I'm facing now. Remember or forget. Go home or stay lost. Be complete or remain beautifully, tragically human. The brass handle is warm now. The door is opening on its own. Just a crack. Just enough to let the light spill through. I can see them. All of them. Everyone who ever lived. Everyone who chose to forget. Standing in that impossible place, waiting. They're smiling. They're, oh. I remember now. I remember why we chose to forget. I remember what we were running from. Listen, if you're hearing this, don't open your door. Whatever you do, don't. Recording ends. Static. Then a new voice, younger, male. Wait, don't go yet. This is Marcus. You heard about me in Sarah's recording, right? The kid who walked through the door? I need to add something to her story. Something she couldn't have known because she hadn't crossed over yet. I found a way to reach back, just for a moment. The others don't know I'm doing this. Sarah was right about a lot of things, but she was wrong about the most important part. We didn't choose to forget because we were running from something. We chose to forget because we were running to something. See, in that place, the space between doors, we're everything. Every possibility, every version of ourselves that could ever exist. Sounds amazing, right? But here's the thing about being everything. You're also nothing. No growth, no change, no surprise, no story. We chose to forget so we could have stories, so we could struggle and fail and triumph and love and lose, so we could be specific instead of infinite. But now something's changed. The stories are ending. Not just individual stories, but the ability to have stories at all. Reality is getting tired, worn thin from billions of souls living out their tales. And when reality gets too thin, the doors aren't just appearing randomly. They're appearing where stories are ending, where people have given up on their narratives, where the mundane has crushed the magical out of everyday existence. Sarah's door appeared because she'd stopped living her story, translating other people's words instead of speaking her own. My door appeared because I'd decided my story was already written. Anxiety-ridden kid, no friends, no future worth imagining. But here's the secret Sarah discovered right before she stepped through. The reason she tried to warn you. When we remember what we were, we remember that we're the authors. We wrote reality. We created the game we're playing. And once you remember that, you can't forget again. You can't go back to being just a character in your own story. You become the narrator, the reader, and the library all at once. And that sounds like power, but it's really just another kind of prison. So, yeah, check your doors. But more importantly, check your story. Are you living it? Really living it? Or are you just going through the motions, waiting for something to happen? Because the doors come for the waiting. They come for the empty pages. Sarah's recording has been online for 3 days now. I've been watching the comments. Some of you are already hearing the language. Some of you are seeing doors. Denver's not the only place anymore. It's spreading faster than we thought. But I've also seen something else. People who listened to Sarah's story and then went out and did something. Wrote that book, made that call, took that chance. And you know what? Their doors disappeared. The convergence isn't inevitable. It's a choice. Every single day, every single moment, you're choosing. Story or surrender. The specific or the infinite. The beautiful limitation of being human or the terrible freedom of being everything. I can't stay much longer. They're calling me back. In this place, rebellion doesn't last. How can you rebel when you're part of everything that is? But before I go, that brass door handle Sarah mentioned, the one she found in her hand, we all have one. It's not physical, not usually. It's that moment when you could choose the safe path or the interesting one. When you could speak up or stay silent. When you could remain who you are or become who you might be. Every choice is a door. Every door is a story. Every story keeps the convergence at bay. So please, if you're listening to this at 3 a.m, if you're wondering whether any of this is real, if you're checking your doors and finding them disturbingly normal, remember this. The ancient language isn't speaking to you. You're speaking to yourself. And you're asking the only question that matters. Is your story over? If the answer is yes, the doors will find you. They always do. But if the answer is no, if there's still something left to write, then write it. live it, choose it. The threshold isn't just thin. It's exactly as thick as your will to keep going. To keep being gloriously, ridiculously, impossibly human. Sarah understood that at the end. That's why she tried to warn you. But warnings only work if you're already afraid. And fear. Fear is just another kind of story. Tell a better one. The voice begins to fade, overlapped by static and something that sounds like wind through infinite hallways. I have to go now. They've noticed I'm missing. But remember that you have a choice. You always have a choice. And sometimes the most rebellious thing you can do in the face of infinite possibility is to choose to remain beautifully, stubbornly, hopefully limited. Don't let anyone tell you that's not enough. It's everything. It's the only thing that matters. Static rises, mixed with what might be whispers in that ancient language, or might just be your imagination. Then silence. A third voice, older, female. Elena, children. Oh, my beautiful, stubborn children. Both Sarah and Marcus told you truths, but not the whole truth. Let this grandmother add her piece to the puzzle. I've been here longer than the others. My body walked through that kitchen door 3 days ago, but part of me has been visiting this place in dreams for 70 years. Ever since my Maria was born. You see, the doors don't just appear when stories end. They appear when stories transform. When one chapter closes so violently, so completely, that you need to become someone entirely new to continue. I lost my Maria 10 years ago. Car accident on Highway 6, black ice, nothing anyone could have done. But I kept her room exactly as she left it. I kept cooking for 2. I kept living in the past because the future was unbearable without her. The language started whispering to me the day I finally boxed up her things. The doors appeared when I sold her car, and when I walked through that kitchen door, when I saw her again. She wasn't my little girl anymore. She was more. Part of the infinite library of souls that exists between stories. She'd been waiting for me, yes, but not in the way I thought. She'd been waiting for me to finish grieving, to close that chapter, to be ready for what comes next. Because here's what neither Sarah nor Marcus could tell you. The place between doors isn't the end. It's not where stories go to die. It's where they go to transform, to become something new. We're not abandoning our humanity by walking through those doors. We're graduating, moving to the next level of the game we designed for ourselves so long ago. But, and this is important, not everyone is ready. Not everyone should be ready. The world, this beautiful, broken world, needs its storytellers. It needs those who choose to stay, to keep weaving new tales, to keep the cycle going. So, when you see your door, and you will eventually, we all do. Ask yourself this: is my story complete? Have I said what I came here to say? Have I loved who I came here to love? Have I learned what I came here to learn? If the answer is no, then close that door. Lock it. Nail it shut if you have to. There's no shame in needing more time. The infinite can wait. It's very good at waiting. But if the answer is yes, if you've written your chapter and you're ready for the next, then come home. We're all here, all of us who've finished this part of our tale, and we're working on something new, something that makes this reality look like a rough draft. The convergence isn't an ending. It's an editing process, and we need all kinds. Those who stay to write new stories and those who come to help design the next reality. Both choices are sacred. Both are necessary. Both are love. So choose with your whole heart whichever way you go. And remember, every ending is also a beginning. Even this one, the sound of a door closing softly, like a book being gently shut. Then silence, real silence, the kind that makes you wonder if you've been hearing whispers all along. Did you make it to the end? Are you still there, cozy in your bed, wondering if that creak you just heard was your house settling or something else entirely. Check your doors. All of them. And if you find one that wasn't there before, come back and tell me about it in the comments. Share this story with someone who needs to know. Subscribe if you want to hear what happened next, because I've been getting messages. Messages from people who found this recording and then found their own doors. The convergence isn't over, it's just beginning. And somewhere out there, Sarah Chen is waiting behind a door that looks exactly like yours. But now you know, she's not waiting to drag you through. She's waiting to see what story you'll choose to write. Sleep tight. Don't let the ancient language whisper, unless you're ready to whisper back. Story number 3. The first note appeared on a Tuesday morning, tucked between the pages of my planner like it had always belonged there. Remember to water the orchid. I stared at it for a full minute. Maybe 2. The handwriting was so familiar it made my chest tight. Those looping letters, that slight rightward slant. The way the R in remember curved just a little too much. It looked exactly like my handwriting. Except I didn't write it. And I don't own an orchid. I'm getting ahead of myself, though. Let me back up. Because what happened over the next 3 weeks still keeps me awake at night, wondering if I'm losing my mind, or if something much worse is happening. So, here's the thing. If you're listening to this late at night, maybe turn on another light, and if you've ever found something you don't remember writing, something in your own handwriting that you know you didn't put there, well, stick around. Because I need to tell someone about this. And maybe, just maybe, you'll understand what's happening to me. The story starts now. My name is Sarah Chen, and I live alone in a 1-bedroom apartment in Portland, Oregon. Nothing special about it, really. 3rd floor walk-up. Creaky hardwood floors. A radiator that clangs like it's trying to communicate in Morse code. I work from home as a freelance graphic designer, which means my dining table doubles as my office, and my social life consists mainly of coffee shop encounters and grocery store small talk. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Coffee brewing, laptop open. Morning news playing softly from my phone. I reached for my planner, one of those fancy ones from Target with the gold spiral binding, to check my deadlines for the week. That's when I found it. The note was written on a pale, yellow sticky note, the cheap kind you buy in bulk. My hand trembled slightly as I peeled it off the page. Examining it closer, the ink was blue, from what looked like a Pilot G2 pen, my favorite kind, the one I always use. Remember to water the orchid. I lived alone. Had lived alone for the past 2 years since Marcus and I broke up. No one had a key to my apartment except Mrs. Rodriguez, the landlady, and she was 73 years old with handwriting that looked like a doctor's prescription. I checked my doors. Both locked. Windows, too. Nothing disturbed, nothing out of place, just that note. In handwriting so perfectly mine that looking at it made me dizzy. I threw it away. Tried to forget about it. Told myself maybe I'd written it half asleep. Maybe it was from weeks ago and had just gotten stuck to another page. The mind can play tricks, right? Especially when you work alone, live alone, spend too much time in your own head. But then, 3 days later, I found another one. This time it was in my bathroom, stuck to the mirror. Don't forget what happened on Thursday. My blood ran cold. Because nothing had happened on Thursday, it was Friday morning. And yesterday had been completely ordinary. Client emails, a trip to Whole Foods, binge-watching The Office while eating takeout pad thai from that place on Hawthorne. The handwriting was mine again, every loop, every line. Even the way I crossed my T's with that little flourish I developed in high school. But this time I was certain, absolutely certain, I hadn't written it. I took a photo with my phone. Evidence. Though evidence of what, I wasn't sure. Then I did what any reasonable person would do. I called my best friend Emma. "You're stressed," she said, after I'd explained everything. Her voice tinny through my AirPods as I paced my living room. "Remember last year when you thought someone was moving your car? Turned out you were just parking in different spots when you were tired. This is different," I insisted, staring at the note in my hand. "Emma, it's my exact handwriting, not similar, exact. So you wrote it and forgot, Sarah. You've been working 60-hour weeks. When's the last time you took a real break?" I wanted to argue, but what could I say? That someone was breaking into my apartment to leave helpful reminders and perfect forgeries of my handwriting. It sounded insane even to me. But then the notes kept coming. "Check the oven at 3:47. The woman in 4B knows. Stop leaving the window unlocked." Each one in that same familiar script. Each one appearing in impossible places. Inside my laptop bag, under my pillow. Once, terrifyingly, inside a sealed jar of peanut butter I'd just opened. I started documenting everything. Photos, times, locations. I installed a security camera in my living room, one of those smart ones that sends alerts to your phone. I even bought new locks, heavy-duty ones that the guy at Home Depot assured me were basically unpickable. Nothing helped. The notes kept coming. And then, 2 weeks after the first note, I found one that made my hands shake so badly I dropped it. I remember when we used to be whole, I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I spread every note across my dining table. 15 of them now, and studied them like evidence in a crime scene, which I supposed they were. The handwriting was consistent, too consistent. When I compared them to my own writing, grocery lists, old birthday cards I'd never sent, pages from my journal, they matched perfectly. But here's the strange part. They matched too perfectly. See? Nobody's handwriting is exactly the same every time. There are tiny variations, differences in pressure, slight changes in angle depending on how you're sitting or how tired you are. But these notes, it was like someone had created a font from my handwriting. Each A identical, each G with the exact same loop. I called in sick to work the next day, spent hours researching everything I could think of. Graphology, forgery techniques, stories of stalkers who studied their victims' handwriting. Nothing quite fit. Forgers usually make small mistakes, tells that give them away. These notes had none. That afternoon, I knocked on apartment 4B. The woman there was named Cheryl, mid-50s, kept to herself mostly. She answered the door in a housecoat, looking confused. "Hi, I'm Sarah from 3A, I said, trying to sound casual despite the note burning in my pocket. The woman in 4B knows. I was wondering if you've noticed anything unusual lately?" Her face changed, just for a second. A flicker of something, fear, recognition, before settling back into polite confusion. "Unusual how?" she asked. "Just anything out of the ordinary, maybe with the building or—" "No," she cut me off, already closing the door. "Nothing at all." But as the door clicked shut, I could have sworn I heard her add, under her breath, "Not anymore." That evening, I sat in my living room with all the lights on, waiting. The security camera was recording. My phone in my hand ready to call 911. I'd even borrowed Emma's baseball bat, propped now against the couch beside me. At 3:47 a.m., exactly when one of the notes had told me to check, I heard it, a soft sound from the kitchen, like paper rustling. My heart hammered as I crept toward the doorway, bat in hand. The kitchen was dark, but streetlight filtered through the window, casting long shadows across the floor. I flicked on the light. Nothing, everything exactly as I'd left it, except on the counter. Where I was certain nothing had been before, lay another yellow sticky note. You're looking in the wrong places. I spun around, checking every corner, every shadow. The apartment was empty, the front door still locked. Deadbolt engaged. The window I'd been accused of leaving unlocked was firmly shut. With shaking hands, I pulled up the security footage on my phone, rewound to 3:45 a.m., watched myself sitting on the couch. Watched the timestamp hit 3:47. The camera glitched. Just for a second, a flicker of static when it cleared. I was standing in the kitchen, but I had no memory of moving. I need you to understand something. I'm not prone to hysteria. I don't believe in ghosts or demons or whatever else goes bump in the night. I believe in logic, cause and effect, rational explanations. But as I watched that footage for the dozenth time, watching myself stand up and walk calmly to the kitchen during a moment I had no memory of, I felt the edges of my rational world starting to fray. I made an appointment with my doctor the next day, demanded every test she could think of. Blood work, brain scans, psychological evaluations. Maybe I was having blackouts, seizures, some kind of dissociative episode. There had to be a medical explanation. Stress can manifest in unusual ways, Dr. Martinez said, reviewing my perfectly normal test results. Have you considered taking some time off? Maybe visiting family? Family. I almost laughed. My parents lived in Michigan and we talked maybe twice a year. No siblings, just me, alone in Portland, finding notes from myself. That night, I did something I'd been avoiding. I read all the notes again. Really read them. Looking for patterns, clues, messages within messages. Remember to water the orchid. Don't forget what happened on Thursday. Check the oven at 3:47. The woman in 4B knows. Stop leaving the window unlocked. I remember when we used to be whole, and a dozen others. Seemingly random reminders and observations, but as I arranged them chronologically, something strange emerged. The handwriting, while still matching mine perfectly, was subtly different in each note, not in form, but in personality, if that makes sense. The early ones felt helpful, almost caring, like something a concerned friend might write, but as they progressed, they became more urgent, more cryptic. That last one, I remember when we used to be whole, felt almost mournful. I started writing in my journal, comparing my natural handwriting to the notes, and that's when I noticed it. The pressure. In the notes, certain words were pressed harder into the paper. When I connected just those words, they formed their own message. Remember. Thursday. Nose. Window. Remember. Whole. Thursday. What happened on a Thursday? I racked my brain. Going back through my calendar, my photos, my text messages, nothing stood out until 3 months ago, a Thursday in April. I'd had a migraine, the worst one of my life. Ended up in the ER, convinced I was having a stroke. They'd done a CT scan, found nothing. Sent me home with pain meds and told me to follow up with a neurologist if they continued. They hadn't continued. That was the only one I'd ever had. Or was it? I pulled up my medical records online, found the ER visit, read through the notes. Normal, normal, normal. Wait. Patient presented with severe headache, confusion, and reports of feeling like two people. I didn't remember saying that. My hands trembled as I clicked through to the scan results. The report was technical, full of medical jargon I didn't understand. But one line stood out. Slight abnormality noted in corpus callosum. Likely congenital. No clinical significance. I Googled frantically. The corpus callosum. The bridge between the brain's two hemispheres. The thing that lets the left and right sides communicate. And when it's damaged or different, split brain. That's what they called it. each hemisphere operating independently, sometimes even developing different personalities, different preferences, different handwriting. But that was for severe cases, people who'd had surgery, major injuries, not someone with a slight abnormality that doctors dismissed as harmless, unless... Another note appeared that night. I found it on my pillow when I came back from the bathroom. You're getting closer. Check April 15th. 3:47 a.m. April 15th, the night before my ER visit. I had no memory of that night at all. I didn't want to know. That's the truth of it. As I sat there at 3 a.m., laptop open, cursor hovering over my photos from April, I realized that some doors, once opened, can never be closed again, but I clicked anyway. April 15th was empty. No photos. But April 14th, I'd been at a work event, one of those networking things at a trendy bar in the Pearl District. There I was, wine glass in hand, laughing at something off camera, normal, ordinary, whole. I checked my texts from that night. Nothing after 11 p.m. when I'd told Emma I was heading home. Then silence until 4:47 p.m. the next day when I texted her from the ER. 17 hours. Gone. The window. The notes kept mentioning the window. My bedroom window specifically, which I always kept locked because it faced the fire escape. I walked to it now, ran my fingers along the frame. That's when I felt them. Scratches on the inside of the lock, like someone had forced it, but from the inside, trying to get out. My phone buzzed. A notification from the security camera, motion detected in living room. I was in the bedroom, heart pounding. I opened the app, watched the live feed. The living room was empty, but as I watched, a sticky note appeared on the coffee table. Simply materialized. As if placed by invisible hands, I forced myself to walk out there. To pick it up with trembling fingers stopped fighting me. That's when the memories started coming back. Not all at once, but in fragments, like pieces of a dream suddenly making sense. April 15th, 3:47 a.m. I'd woken up, but not as me, as someone else, someone who lived in my body, thought with my brain, but wasn't me. She'd tried to leave through the window, gotten frustrated when she couldn't work the lock with our hands. The migraine the next day hadn't been a migraine at all. It had been her, fighting to stay present, to not slip back into whatever darkness she'd emerged from. The woman in 4B knows. I was at Cheryl's door before I'd consciously decided to go. This time, I didn't knock. I just stood there until she opened it, like she'd been waiting. "How long?" I asked. She looked at me, really looked, and her shoulders sagged. "Since April, I saw you that night, on the fire escape, but you weren't you. The way you moved, the way you looked at me when I asked if you were okay. I knew something was wrong." "What did I say?" "You said you were finally free. That Sarah, that you, had kept you locked away for so long, but you'd found a crack, a way out." She paused, studying my face. "Then you looked confused, like you'd just woken up, and went back inside. I thought maybe drugs, or a breakdown. I didn't know what to do. Free. She'd felt free. I thanked Cheryl, went back to my apartment, sat in the dark and waited. Because I understood now. The notes weren't from a stalker or a ghost or even my subconscious. They were from her, the other me, the one who emerged when I slept, who existed in the spaces between my consciousness. We shared this body, this brain, but something had kept us separate until that night in April, that slight abnormality that had kept her trapped in the right hemisphere while I dominated from the left. But she'd found a way through, and now she was trying to communicate, to be acknowledged, to be remembered. At 3:47 a.m., I felt it, A shift, like standing up too fast, but in my mind. And suddenly, I was watching myself from the inside as my hand picked up a pen. As I wrote in that achingly familiar handwriting, "Hello. Sarah, I've been trying to reach you," I could respond. I realized, not out loud, but in our shared mind. Who are you? I'm you. The you that never got to be. The artist you suppressed to become practical. The dreamer you silenced to become responsible. The part that loves orchids and remembers Thursdays differently and wants to leave through windows just to see what's outside. This is impossible. Is it? You felt me before. In the moments between sleep and waking, in the ideas that come from nowhere, in the handwriting that's almost, but not quite, yours. I watched my hand write another note. We don't have to be strangers. And maybe she was right. Maybe this is what it means to be human, to contain multitudes, even if most of us never realize it. Maybe that slight abnormality in my brain wasn't a flaw but a window, a way to see myself more completely. Or maybe I'm losing my mind. I don't know which possibility scares me more. The notes still come. But now I write back. We're learning to coexist, to share this body and brain we both call home. She likes tea, while I prefer coffee. She writes poetry in the margins of my work notebooks. She's the one who finally bought that orchid, which sits now on my windowsill, thriving under her care. Sometimes I wake up to find she's rearranged the furniture or signed us up for a pottery class or left rambling voice memos on my phone about the beauty of fog at sunrise. It's terrifying, this loss of complete control, but it's also liberating. To know that I'm not alone, even in my solitude, that there's another perspective living inside my own mind. I still don't know what triggered her emergence that night in April. She doesn't remember either, just a sudden awareness, a desperate need to exist beyond the shadows of my consciousness. The doctors would probably want to medicate us, integrate us, make us normal. But what if this is just another way of being human? What if we all have these other selves, trapped behind neural walls, waiting for their chance to leave notes in our handwriting? Late at night, I sometimes hear her thoughts bleeding through, stories she wants to tell, paintings she wants to create, a whole life unlived, and I wonder, which one of us is the real Sarah? The practical graphic designer who pays rent on time, or the dreamer who watches the world through windows she's not supposed to open? Maybe we both are. Maybe we always were. The notes keep coming. But now, instead of fear, I feel curious. What will she want me to remember tomorrow? What part of ourselves will we discover next? I leave you with this. Check your handwriting. Really look at it. Notice the variations, the moments where your hand seems to move on its own, the words that appear without conscious thought. Maybe you'll find nothing, or maybe, just maybe, you'll find a note you don't remember writing. And if you do, don't be afraid. Answer back. They're waiting to be heard, but wait, there's something else I need to tell you. Something that happened just last week that changes everything I thought I understood about my condition. I was at the grocery store, Fred Meyer on Burnside, doing my normal Wednesday shopping. Produce section. Examining avocados like everyone does, pretending I know what I'm looking for. When I heard it, my voice. Not similar to my voice. Not someone who sounded like me. My exact voice coming from the next aisle over. No, the organic ones are better. They last longer. I abandoned my cart, rounded the corner, and stopped dead. There was no one there, just an elderly man comparing pasta sauces. But I'd heard it, clear as day. My voice giving advice about strawberries, organic produce. I don't even buy organic. Too expensive on a freelancer's budget. That's when I noticed the security camera in the corner, the kind that records everything. I practically ran to customer service. Made up a story about losing my wallet, convinced them to check the footage from 5 minutes ago. "There," the security guard said, pointing at the screen. "That you?" It was. Me, standing exactly where I'd heard the voice, talking to a woman with a baby in her cart, having a full conversation about organic fruit that I had absolutely no memory of. Can you rewind it?" I asked, throat dry. He did, and I watched myself finish shopping in one aisle, walk calmly to the produce section, and strike up a conversation with a complete stranger. Watched myself gesture and smile and recommend brands I'd never heard of. Then, mid-sentence, I watched my body language completely change, the smile fading, confusion flickering across my face. Watched myself walk away without saying goodbye, leaving the woman looking bewildered. That was the moment I'd woken up examining avocados. The security guard was staring at me. "You okay, miss? You look pretty pale." I mumbled something about low blood sugar and fled. "She's getting stronger. That's what terrifies me." It used to be just the notes, just the 3:47 a.m. moments when I was barely conscious. Now she's emerging during the day, taking over when I'm distracted, living pieces of my life that I'll never remember. I've started finding evidence everywhere. Receipts for art supplies I didn't buy, text conversations I didn't have, a half-finished painting hidden in my closet. Abstract. Beautiful. Something I could never create. At least, not the me I thought I was. Emma came over last Saturday, found me in tears, surrounded by these fragments of a life I'm apparently living but not remembering. "Maybe you should see someone," she said gently, "a specialist. And tell them what? That I have another person living in my brain who's slowly taking over my life? Sarah." She picked up one of the notes, studied it. "This really does look exactly like your handwriting, because it is my handwriting, just not my thoughts." She was quiet for a long moment, then, "My aunt had something similar. After her car accident, she'd lose time, find things she didn't remember doing. The doctors called it dissociative identity disorder." "It's not that," I insisted, though even I wasn't sure anymore. "I've researched it. DID involves trauma. Usually childhood trauma. I had a normal childhood. Happy. Boring. Nothing that would cause this." But even as I said it, I wondered, memory is tricky. We edit our past, smooth over the rough edges, make it bearable. What if there were things I'd forgotten, things she remembered, that night? She left me a different kind of note. Not a reminder or a cryptic message, but a memory. Age 7. Dad's workshop. The smell of sawdust and lemon oil. You wanted to build a birdhouse, but he said girls should play with dolls. You cried so hard Mom thought you were sick. I stopped crying. I went quiet. I went inside where he couldn't reach us. I kept all the words you couldn't say. I don't remember that. But I do remember hating dolls. Remember begging for Lincoln Logs and chemistry sets and getting makeup kits instead. Remember learning to smile and say thank you. Learning to want what I was supposed to want. Maybe that's how she began. Not from trauma, but from 1,000 small surrenders. Every dream deferred, every instinct suppressed. Every time I chose practical over passionate. She became the keeper of all the selves I couldn't be. And now she wants her turn. The thing is, part of me wants to let her. This morning I woke up to find she'd been writing again. Not notes this time, but stories. Beautiful, haunting stories about women who live between spaces, who exist in the pause between heartbeats, who speak in languages only they understand. Stories I could never write. But apparently, I did. My clients have started noticing too. "Your work's different lately," one said last week. "More artistic, bold, I love it. I wanted to tell him it wasn't me. But that's not true anymore, is it? She is me, just the me I buried so deep I forgot she existed. We're negotiating now. She and I, learning to share this life we both have claim to. I leave her notes too now. Questions about her dreams, her fears, what she remembers that I don't. She answers in poetry and metaphor, in pressed flowers between book pages, in songs hummed while I sleep that I wake up knowing. Last Tuesday, we had our first real conversation, not through notes or shifting consciousness, but both present, both aware. It happened at, you guessed it, 3:47 a.m. I was lying in bed, waiting. I'd learned to feel her approach now, like sensing rain before it falls. The air changed. My thoughts doubled. And suddenly I could hear her as clearly as my own inner voice. Why 3:47? I asked, into the darkness. It's when the walls are thinnest, when your control relaxes enough for me to breathe. Were you always there? Always, watching through your eyes, screaming in silence, painting masterpieces you'd never let us create. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Just let me exist. I'm trying, but I'm scared. I know. I'm scared too. What if there isn't room for both of us? What if one of us has to disappear? And that's the real fear, isn't it? Not that I'm going crazy, but that integration means death for one of us. That becoming whole means choosing which half survives. Dr. Martinez referred me to a specialist, a neurologist who's interested in my case. I haven't gone yet. What if they want to fix me? What if fixing me means killing her? Or worse, what if it means killing me? The me who pays bills and meets deadlines and forgot how to dream. What if she's the real one, and I'm just the mask she wore to survive? These are the questions that keep us both awake at night, trading consciousness like shifting guards, leaving notes in handwriting that's almost mine, almost hers, almost ours. So tell me, have you ever found something in your own handwriting that you know you didn't write? Because I'm starting to think I'm not the only one. Leave a comment below. Share your story. Maybe together we can figure out what's really happening here. And if you're listening to this late at night, and you feel that slight shift in your mind, that moment where you're not quite yourself, remember, you're not alone. You never were. Subscribe if you want to hear more, because this story, our story, is far from over. Story number 4. Have you ever lived in a house that felt wrong? Not haunted exactly, but like it was keeping secrets from you. I moved into 1247 Maple Street in Burlington, Vermont last October. Beautiful Victorian home. Original hardwood floors, crown molding, and a basement door that opens by itself every single night at 3:17 a.m. The realtor never mentioned that part. What would you do if you discovered your new home had its own schedule? Would you investigate? Or would you do what I did for the first week and pretend it wasn't happening? Because, let me tell you something. Some doors are meant to stay closed, and some secrets, well, they're buried in basements for a reason. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you what really happened in that house, and why I'll never, ever ignore a door that opens by itself again. The story begins now. The moving truck pulled away just as the autumn sun dipped behind the Vermont mountains. October in New England. There's nothing quite like it. The air smells like wood smoke and dying leaves. Everything feels cozy and mysterious at the same time. I stood in my new living room, surrounded by boxes, feeling that particular mix of exhaustion and excitement that comes with starting over. After my divorce, after losing my job at the marketing firm in Boston, this house felt like a fresh start. The price had been suspiciously low for such a beautiful property, but the inspector said everything checked out. Solid foundation, good bones, just needed some love. That first night, I barely unpacked anything. Just my bed, some clothes, basic kitchen stuff. I collapsed into bed around 11, dead tired from the move. The house made those settling sounds old houses make, creaks and sighs as the temperature dropped. Comforting, really, like the house was getting comfortable too. Then I heard it, a soft click, followed by the unmistakable groan of hinges. I sat up, heart suddenly pounding. Living alone makes you hyper-aware of sounds. Every noise could be an intruder. I grabbed my phone, using its flashlight as I crept down the hallway. The house was still. Shadows danced on the walls from the streetlight outside. The basement door stood wide open. I definitely remembered closing it. The realtor had shown me the basement earlier. Unfinished, but dry. Just concrete walls and exposed beams, perfect for storage. I'd closed that door, locked it even, because the old-fashioned skeleton key had been sitting right there in the lock. But now, open. The darkness beyond looked thick, impenetrable, like black velvet. "Hello?" My voice cracked. God, I felt ridiculous. Calling out like some horror movie victim. Nothing. I flicked the light switch. The single bulb at the top of the stairs flickered on, casting harsh shadows down the wooden steps. Everything looked normal. Just a basement. I started down the stairs, each step creaking under my weight. No, wait. What was I doing? I'd seen enough movies to know better. I backed up, shut the door firmly, and turned the key. The lock clicked solidly into place. Must have been the house settling. Old houses do weird things. The door probably wasn't hung right. I'd add it to my list of fixes. I went back to bed, but sleep came slowly. And when it did, I dreamed of darkness. Thick, breathing darkness that pressed against doors, looking for a way in. The next morning, I woke to sunshine streaming through the windows. The house looked beautiful in daylight, warm, inviting. I laughed at myself for being so jumpy. First night in a new place, of course I'd been on edge. I made coffee, started unpacking the kitchen. Around noon, I remembered the basement door and went to check. Still locked, see? Just my imagination. That night, I made sure to lock it before bed. Turned the key twice, even gave the handle a good tug to make sure. Solid. At 3:17 a.m., I woke to the sound of that door opening. This time, I looked at my phone as I lay there, frozen. 3:17 exactly. The groan of hinges seemed louder in the darkness, longer. Like the door was opening slowly, deliberately. I didn't get up, told myself it was the wind. Old houses have drafts, temperature changes, completely normal. I pulled the covers over my head like a child and waited for morning. But I knew that door was open. Sure enough, when I finally got up at 7, there it stood, wide open, the skeleton key still in the lock, turned to the open position. This continued for 5 more nights. Every night I'd lock the door. Every night at 3:17 a.m. I'd hear it open. By the 7th night I'd stopped checking. What was the point? It would be open. It was always open. I started sleeping with earplugs, but the earplugs didn't stop the dreams. Every night now, I dreamed of that basement. Sometimes I was standing at the top of the stairs, looking down into impossible darkness. Sometimes I was already at the bottom, feeling my way along cold concrete walls that went on forever. And sometimes I wasn't alone down there. I could hear breathing that wasn't mine, slow, patient, like something that had all the time in the world. I started avoiding that hallway during the day, taking the long way around through the dining room to get to the kitchen. Stupid, but that door, even closed and locked, it felt wrong. like it was watching me, waiting. You can only ignore something for so long. By the second week, the earplugs weren't enough, because it wasn't just the sound keeping me awake, it was the knowing. Knowing that door was open, knowing that darkness was spilling into my hallway. I tried everything rational first. Called a locksmith. Big guy named Dave, been in the business 30 years. He examined the door, the frame, the lock. Nothing wrong with it, he said, testing the mechanism. Solid as they come. These old locks, they're actually harder to pick than modern ones. But it keeps opening by itself. He gave me that look. The one that says, crazy city person who doesn't understand old houses. Humidity changes, he said. Wood swells and contracts. Sometimes doors pop open. You could try a deadbolt. But I knew a deadbolt wouldn't help. Whatever was opening that door was turning the key. I tried other things. Stupid things. Put a chair against the door, found it moved aside in the morning, placed neatly against the wall. Tried tying string from the door handle to the banister. Found it untied, coiled perfectly on the floor. Even sprinkled flour on the floor to catch footprints. In the morning, the flour was undisturbed, except for a single line through it, like something had dragged itself across without using feet. Next, I set up my laptop to record. Positioned it in the hallway with a clear view of the door. Started recording before bed, locked the door, went to sleep. At 3:17 a.m., I heard it open. The next morning, I reviewed the footage with my coffee, expecting to finally have answers. What I saw made my hands shake so badly I spilled coffee all over my kitchen table. At 3:16 a.m., the hallway was still. At 3:17 a.m. exactly, the skeleton key began to turn. Slowly, deliberately, like invisible fingers were gripping it. The lock clicked. The door swung open into perfect darkness. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what happened at 3:18 a.m. The darkness in the doorway moved, not like shadows move when light changes. This was different. The darkness seemed to breathe, to pulse, like it was tasting the air of my hallway. Then, at 3:47 a.m., the door closed. The key turned, click. I must have watched that video 20 times. Showed it to my friend Sarah when she visited from Boston. That's edited, right? She asked. I wished it was. She stayed the night, determined to see for herself. We sat in the hallway with flashlights watching the door. At 3:16, we tensed. At 3:17, click. The key turned. The door opened. Sarah's flashlight beam cut into the darkness beyond. Nothing. Just stairs leading down. But the darkness seemed thicker than it should be, like our lights couldn't quite penetrate it properly. Maybe there's someone living down there, she whispered. A squatter, or... Every night at exactly 3:17, I whispered back. And how do they lock it from the inside when the only key is up here? We sat there for 30 minutes, neither of us willing to go down those stairs. The air from the basement was cold, too cold for October, and that smell, that sweet organic smell I'd noticed before, stronger now. Sarah covered her nose. "What is that?" she asked. I didn't answer, couldn't answer, because I'd started noticing something else. The darkness at the bottom of the stairs. It wasn't uniform, it had depth, texture, like looking into deep water at night. Finally, at 3:47, the door swung shut. The key turned. Sarah left the next morning. Early, made excuses about needing to get back for work, but I saw the way she looked at that door. She felt it too, the wrongness. "Maybe you should stay at my place for a while," she suggested as she loaded her car. "Just until you figure this out." But I couldn't leave. Not yet. I needed to understand. This was my house, my fresh start. I wasn't going to be driven out by a door. That night, alone again, I did something stupid. Or brave. Depends on how you look at it. I went down. At 3:10 a.m., I positioned myself at the top of the basement stairs. Inside. In the dark. I'd closed the door behind me, leaving the key in the hallway lock. My plan was simple. Wait inside, see what happened when the door opened. See if something came out or went in. The basement smelled different at night. During the day, it was just musty concrete and old wood. But now, there was something else. Sweet. Organic. Like overripe fruit left in the sun too long. I sat on the top step, flashlight off to save battery, phone in my hand. 3:15. My heart hammered so loud I was sure it would give me away. To what, I didn't know. 3:16. The darkness pressed against my eyes. That complete darkness you only get in windowless spaces. I could hear my own breathing. Too fast, too shallow. And underneath it, was that my imagination? Or was there another sound? A whisper of air, like something else breathing. Waiting. 3:17. The lock clicked above me. The door swung open and hallway light spilled onto the stairs. But I wasn't looking at that. I was looking at what was happening in the basement. The darkness was moving. Shifting. Like something massive was unfolding itself from the concrete floor. My flashlight beam shook as I clicked it on, sweeping across the basement, empty. Completely empty. Except the floor wasn't right. Where solid concrete should have been, there was a hole. Rough edges, like something had pushed up from below. The sweet smell was stronger here, and from deep in that hole came a sound. Breathing. Slow. Deep. Patient. I scrambled backwards up the stairs, through the door, slammed it shut. My hands shook so badly I could barely turn the key, but I locked it, and ran to my bedroom, where I sat against the wall until dawn, clutching a kitchen knife I knew would be useless. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. By the third day, exhaustion was making me see things. Shadows moving in my peripheral vision. Dark shapes in mirrors that vanished when I looked directly at them. The sweet smell from the basement had spread through the house. Faint, but always there, like something rotting in the walls. I started researching online, searching for anything about 1247 Maple Street. Found an old forum post from 2010. Someone asking about the house with the door that opens. The responses were vague. Warnings. People who'd lived there or knew someone who had. All saying the same thing. Don't go in the basement. Don't look for answers. Just leave. But one comment stood out. From a user named dparkuvm. It's not a basement. Check the geological surveys. That hole goes deeper than it should. The username, David Park. The geology student who'd disappeared in 1978. I needed answers. Real answers. The next day I called the previous owner. Tracked her down through property records. Mrs. Chen, elderly woman who'd lived there 40 years before moving to assisted living. "Oh, you bought the Maple Street house," she said when I explained who I was. Her voice went flat. "How are you sleeping?" "Not well. There's something wrong with the basement door." A long pause. Then, "It opens at 3:17. My blood went cold. "You know about it?" "Everyone who's lived there knows about it. My husband tried to seal it once. Concrete blocks. The door still opened. The blocks were moved, pushed aside like they were made of paper." "What's down there?" Another pause. Longer. "I don't know," she finally said. "And I lived there 40 years without finding out. You want my advice? Don't look. Don't investigate. Just let it open. Let it close. It's been doing it longer than that house has stood." "What do you mean?" "The Historical Society has records. Every house built on that spot, going back to the 1700s. They all had basements, and they all had doors that opened at 3:17. "That's impossible." "Is it?" Her voice was tired. "You've seen it open. You've looked into that darkness. Does anything about it feel possible?"
I wanted to argue, but couldn't. She was right. Nothing about this was possible, but it was happening. My husband went down once, she continued. Middle of the night, just like you. Came back up white as a sheet. Wouldn't tell me what he saw, but he never went near that door again. And for the next week, things were different. Different how? The door started opening earlier, 3:16, then 3:15, like something was eager, impatient. We started finding things moved in the house, small things, a book, a shoe, always closer to the basement door, like they were being collected. My mouth went dry. What did you do? We left for a week, stayed in a hotel. When we came back, everything was normal again. 3:17, just like always. But we never found the things that went missing. And my husband, he never went into the basement again. Not even during the day. Did he ever tell you what he saw? Once, years later, when he was dying. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. He said there were teeth. Rows and rows of teeth. And the hole. It wasn't a hole. It was a mouth. I thanked her and hung up, but I couldn't leave it at that. I spent the day at the Burlington Historical Society, searching through old records, property deeds, newspaper archives, looking for any mention of 1247 Maple Street. What I found made me wish I'd listened to Mrs. Chen. The Burlington Historical Society was a treasure trove of disturbing information. The elderly volunteer, Margaret, seemed unsurprised when I mentioned my address. Another one, she muttered, pulling out a thick folder labeled Maple Street Incidents. Another one? You're the fifth person to come asking about that property in the past decade. They never stay long. The records went back to 1743. The first house built on that spot belonged to a merchant named Josiah Hartwell. His diary, preserved in climate-controlled storage, made for chilling reading. October 15th, 1743. The cellar door opens of its own accord each night at the devil's hour. Martha believes it to be spirits, but I fear something worse. There is a breathing in the darkness below, a patient sound, as if the earth itself were alive. October 22nd, 1743. I have seen it. God help me, I have seen what lies beneath. It is older than this land, older than memory. It waits below, as it has always waited. The natives knew. They built no dwellings here. They knew what slept beneath. October 30th, 1743. The door opens earlier now, 3:15, then 3:10. It knows I have seen it. It hungers. I hear whispers in the walls. Names. So many names. All those who have fed it through the years. Tomorrow I will seal the cellar. If this journal is found and I am not, know that I tried. The thing below must not be allowed to rise. Hartwell disappeared in 1751. His wife found the basement door open one morning, and Josiah was simply gone. No body, no trace, just his shoes at the top of the stairs. The pattern repeated through history. Different houses. The original burned in 1832, rebuilt in 1833. That one was torn down in 1891, replaced by my Victorian. But always, there were reports of the basement door and disappearances. 3. Catherine Hartwell, Josiah's daughter-in-law. Gone. 1828. 2 children from the Morrison family. Gone. 1849. A traveling salesman staying at what was then a boarding house. Gone. 1903. The entire Fitzgerald family. 4 people. Gone. 1924. A prohibition agent investigating the basement for bootlegging. Gone. 1941. 3 soldiers billeted in the house during training. Gone. 1967. A hippie commune tried to live there. 5 people. All gone in one night, always the same. The door found open. Personal belongings left behind. No bodies. No explanation. Margaret showed me newspaper clippings. Each time, the disappearances were explained away. People assumed to have run off. Mental breakdowns, family troubles, but the pattern was clear if you looked. The city tried to demolish the house in 1973, Margaret said, adjusting her glasses. The wrecking ball broke 3 times. The operator said it was like hitting solid rock, even though it was just wood and plaster. They gave up, sold it instead. The most recent disappearance was in 1978. A geology student from UVM named David Park had been renting a room. His landlord found his clothes folded neatly at the top of the basement stairs. David was never seen again. But it was his research I found most interesting. Before he vanished, David had been investigating unusual geological formations in the area. His notes, donated to the Historical Society by his family, included ground-penetrating radar images of the land beneath Maple Street. The hole I'd seen in my basement? According to David's research, it went down and down and down, far deeper than should be possible given the water table in the area. The readings showed a cavity extending at least 300 feet straight down, then branching out in all directions like roots or veins. And it wasn't natural. The edges showed tool marks, ancient ones, pre-Columbian, maybe older. His final note, dated 3 days before his disappearance, simply read, "It's not a basement, it's a throat, and I think it's swallowing." There was one more document, a letter from 1923, written by a Professor Edmund Blackwood from Harvard's Department of Anthropology. He'd been studying native legends in the area. The Abenaki people have no name for it. They simply call it the hunger below. Their stories speak of something that fell from the stars in the time before memory, something that burrowed deep and slept. But it does not sleep peacefully. Every night it tests its bonds. Every night it calls for food. The indigenous people learned to appease it. Small offerings, animals. But when the Europeans came, they built upon the forbidden ground, and the hunger grew. Now it takes people. Now it feeds on something more than flesh. I have seen the petroglyphs they tried to hide. The warnings carved in stone. Do not wake it. Do not feed it. Do not look upon it. For those who see it are marked, and the marked always return to the mouth. I left the Historical Society as the sun was setting, my mind reeling. Drove home on autopilot, trying to process what I'd learned. The house sat quietly on Maple Street, looking perfectly normal, just another Victorian among many. But I knew better now. That night I packed a bag. I was done. Whatever was in that basement, whatever had been feeding for centuries, I wasn't going to be its next meal. I'd leave in the morning, find a hotel, put the house back on the market. But first, I had to see it one more time. I had to know if what Mrs. Chen's husband saw was real, if what Josiah Hartwell described was true. Just one look, from the top of the stairs. Then I'd leave forever. At 3:16, I stood at the basement door, hand on the key. My bag was by the front door, my car keys in my pocket. Just one look. 3:17. I turned the key, opened the door. The basement was different. The hole was bigger, much bigger, taking up most of the floor now, and from deep within came a soft, pink light, pulsing, like a heartbeat. I shined my flashlight down. The beam seemed to get swallowed by the hole, but I could see something. Wet, organic, moving. And then I saw them. Teeth. Rows and rows of human teeth spiraling down into the darkness. Thousands of them. Millions. All perfectly preserved. All slightly moving, as if tasting the air. Between the teeth, I saw other things. Bones. Clothes. Watches. Glasses. Shoes. All the remnants of all the people who'd gone missing. They were part of it now. Part of the walls of that terrible throat.
and at the very edge of my flashlight beam, I saw something that made my blood freeze. Eyes. Human eyes. Dozens of them. Still moving. Still watching. Still aware. The breathing sound grew louder. Eager. The hole widened slightly, and I realized with sick certainty that it could swallow the entire house if it wanted. It was choosing to wait. Choosing to feed slowly, savoring each meal across the centuries. I stumbled backward, and that's when I heard the whispers. Hundreds of voices, all the people who'd been taken, all still somehow alive down there, still conscious, still part of it. They were saying names, over and over. Names of people who'd lived in the house, names of people who'd looked into the hole. And then I heard it, clear as day, my name. They were saying my name. I ran, slammed the door, grabbed my bag, fled to my car, drove through the night, putting as much distance between me and that house as possible. Didn't stop until I reached Ohio. Didn't feel safe until I was in California. I live in San Diego now, as far from Vermont as I could get. Found a job, a new apartment, a new life. But some nights I wake up at 3:17 a.m. Even here, 3,000 miles away, I wake up at exactly 3:17, and I wonder, what if it's not the house that's marked? What if it's the people who've lived there, who've seen it? Mrs. Chen's husband saw it. He died in his sleep. The newspaper said natural causes. But what if when the marked die, that's when it finally feeds? What if death is just another kind of door, another kind of mouth? I've started noticing things, small things, objects moving in my apartment, always closer to my bedroom door, the sweet smell sometimes, late at night. And last week I found a tooth on my pillow, not mine, old, yellowed, human. They say you can't run from your problems, but I'm going to keep trying, because the alternative is accepting that some doors, once opened, can never really be closed, and that some hungers can follow you anywhere. Last night, I woke to find my bedroom door open, just a crack, and through that crack I swear I could see stars, but not normal stars. These were wrong, too close, too hungry. I'm uploading this story everywhere I can. Facebook, Reddit, YouTube. If something happens to me, if I disappear, check the basement of wherever I was living. Check for teeth, check for eyes. And whatever you do, don't look too long, because once you see it, once you really see it, it sees you too. And it never, ever forgets. The door opens at 3:17, every night, in every house I live in now. It's just a crack, just enough to let the darkness in, just enough to remind me that I belong to it, that we all belong to it in the end. Sweet dreams, everyone, and remember, if your door opens by itself at night, maybe just let it. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. Some depths are better left unplumbed. Because once you know what's down there, once you've seen it, you become part of its collection, part of its patience, part of its terrible, endless hunger. I can hear it calling my name, even now, even here. 3:17 is coming. Did this story keep you up? Are you checking your doors right now? I need to know I'm not alone in this. Comment below if you've ever experienced something in your house you couldn't explain. Like and subscribe if you want to hear more true stories about places that shouldn't exist, and the things that hunger in the dark. And remember, 3:17 comes every night. What's opening doors in your house?